Hello, welcome to I Know a Guy Bicycles, hanging out with the guy. Hi, I'm Justin, the guy. So we're going to talk about wheels. Wheels is a third of your bike. So when you're looking at bikes, you got three major components or part perspectives, basically, what you're looking at. One is the frame and fork. The second is the componentry, the shifting and brakes. And third is the wheels. So when you're looking at the value of the bike, especially with the new bikes, when the prices go up and down between 500 to 1,000 on a new bike, you're looking at a few of those things changing, and some of them staying the same. When you look over that price, look at all three things are changing. So when you're looking at used, that's a pretty big value piece that could either be great, nice wheel set, it's awesome, so a third of the value of the bike, or it's damaged and it's a costly expense. So try to help you identify that costly expense looking at wheels. So this is a touring stand, and obviously this is an older version that could been modified with all the modern tech, accommodating for 29ers with a disc brake, rotor, a measure guide, and larger guides here, but typically the newer versions look similar to this, but without as many quick release skewers. But anyway, also a nice stand. It's nice to support it as well. This is in angles too, so you can angle it. But I'll talk about touring stands at another time. But this is where we're going to talk about wheels. So when you're looking at wheels, the three main components of the wheels. You got the hub, the spokes, and the rim, right? So first, before I true a wheel, I want to make sure that the hub is smooth. And the only really way to tell this is when you take it off a bike and actually spin it. So with hubs, bottom brackets, and headsets, you want it to be smooth, but not loose or any knock to it. Reason being, if there's a knock, that means they're not tight enough, and that'll actually damage the bearings. Or if it's too tight, like you feel notching, like we went over with headsets, it'll kind of pit those races inside. And a lot of the hubs of today have not loose bearings. They do have cartridge bearings. Now those guys eventually go bad, kind of like your skateboard bearing. But they last a lot longer and they don't need as much adjustment. But the loose bearing ones, like older hubs, oh yeah, that's a fine-tune adjustment to that to make sure. And you're using cone wrenches with like a 15 or 17 millimeter box wrench to adjust those. That's a whole can of worms. There's a whole bunch of videos on how to adjust those. I'm not going to that. I'm just more going to show you what I do in inspecting. So first, I check out the wheel, make sure it's smooth. If it has decent tires on them, I air them up to about wherever the range is. I mean, most of them go up to about 100. This one goes to 123 PSI. 1, 2, 3, kind of funny. But I usually do about 110. For me, that's kind of my sweet spot because it's not too firm to make the road ride too vibrating and not too mushy if you do hit something that causes damage to the rim. So back to inspecting. So you want to look at all the spokes and kind of look on both sides, make sure they're straight, there's no kinks or bends, and also you're looking at the spoke nipples to make sure they're not rounded out or broken or any of that nature as inspection. If you do see an odd spoke, it could have been just replaced, which is fine, but it doesn't match everything else, so there may have been a problem somewhere. And spokes do break over time sometimes, depending how much tension and so forth on this. When you're looking at the rear wheel, this is what they call the drive side. This spoke will be shorter than the non-drive, so that's why you'll have that angle, so that's perfectly normal. This one has direct pull spokes, so it doesn't have that J-bend. Actually, it's supposedly a little bit stronger aspect. So, these are, they might be dated wheels, but they're really good quality back then, and still in today's standards, it's really good. So also, when you get bikes that are used, it's gonna be dirty. Like everywhere is dirty. So I'm gonna, basically, I take it into my shop sink, and I use soap and water, like Dawn dish soap, with water to scrub it all out with a dish brush to get out all the dirt and all the little nick and crannies. Then after that, I do clean it off with a cleaning solution. This is Armor All. So It's something that cleans and polishes at the same time and also shines up the tires and the rims. So I can inspect the spokes, the hub, and the rims while I do that process. So I'm gonna go wash this, and after that we're going to go and put it in the touring stand and kind of show what I do for cleaning the rim and inspecting. I'm not going to be teaching you how to true wheels. It's a whole new another can of worms. There's a whole other host of videos for that out there in the world. But for inspecting, there's really not that many. So I'll go over the couple of tidbits that I more so in detail after I wash this wheel. So after cleaning, I got most of the dirt off, and the reason I was really scrubbing is this one has a lot of little gaps, and it's really hard to get in there and clean those out. And I try to scrub it out as much as possible while it's in the shop sink, because once I get it out and I try to, it's really hard. I'm not going to sit here with toothpicks and Q-tips to clean those out. So I'm going to try to, I'll use a rag, of course, but so forth. So once you have a clean wheel, this really helps identify if there's any issues and so forth. Like I talked about before, dirt is really sneaky. It'll cover up and hide things. So you want to inspect. And so what, it's like identify the hub is real smooth, so that's good. So I'll put it in the truing stand. And before I even start truing, I clean it and inspect, because if the rim's damaged, what's the point of trying to true it, right? So for me, cleaning is the key. So I just get some of my polisher. You can use any kind of polishing, and you don't want to go too heavy on this, but enough to, start cleaning the rim surface. And I start with the rim surface first. Then once I got the rim down, I look for the valve, and I start there, and then I just start cleaning between the spokes. And as I'm doing this, I'm inspecting the rim, the eyelets where the nipples go into, make sure they're not cracked, make sure there's no impacts, dings, or any of that nature. Also, the stickers themselves can be weather worn, which is fine. That doesn't have to do with anything with the actual function of the rim. Then I clean the spokes one at a time, and as I'm wiping them down, I'm also feeling as if there's any kind of bend spots or anything like that to the spoke. Or if I'll find out they're loose, like if it's loose, it'll be like wiggle, wiggle, wiggle. So go through on both sides. Then lastly, the wipe down is the hub, and I just kind of clean the internal drive side, and I clean the inside of the hub. Not that I found hardly any damage to these in a sense, but just to clean them. And you never know, you may have a bad cracked rim or a hub. Now I've seen those on some hubs, the high tension, where they'll be broken off, where you'll see hairline cracks in there. So that's another thing you want to be mindful. So the rim is clean. and spokes have been clean. And also give the little tire a little bit of polish while I'm up here so it's easier. And also, as I'm spinning it, I'm looking at the angle of the tire and see if there's any kind of variation, if it's been damaged, bubbling out or whatever. So it's, I want it to run smooth, that kind of thing. So when you're looking at the tire, and if it wiggles, it may be a tire issue or the rim might be bent. But to identify the rim being bent, make sure you're looking at the rim and not assuming that the tire is what's the cause. So because, the tire could have a bubble out of it, or the thread wall may be compromised, so it's kind of sticking out or not seated correctly. And now make it look like the wheel is bent, but it really isn't. It's the actual tire itself. The rim itself is where you want to identify if it's bent. When you're looking at your bike, you lift it up and you spin the wheel, you use your brake pads, which is similar to the guides here on the truing stand, and they stay in a fixed position, so you can see in that gap if that rim is moving back and forth. And in this one it is, and using my truing stand, I can tighten it up and see where it's bumping up against it. Then I can adjust the spokes accordingly to tighten them or to loosen them to move them in the directions. So when I'm truing wheels, it's three-plane perspective. You got the roundness, so for hops and so forth, and you got side to side, and also that rim being centered to the hub. So it's a mind-bending kind of situation. Once you start truing wheels, it's you can get yourself in a hot mess real quick. But for the most part, you can do some tweaks and adjustments. But keep in mind, and there's 100 different videos out there how to true wheels and so forth. It is not easy. It's an art form in itself. And if you don't want to mess up those very expensive wheels, take them to a bike shop to have them trued up. The cost of the truing is going to be way lower than if you messed it up. But if you have some older wheels that you just want to try on first, just to see, and you're not too worried about it, if you want to learn, use some wheels that are not so expensive, or you're going to be using that kind of thing, just to see, because it's kind of a reverse thinking perspective. So as I'm truing this, also I'm checking cable tensions as I'm pushing and squeezing these, and they want them to be consistent. If you have some that are like super tight and super loose, that means it's been compromised to a point where they're forcing the tension of the spoke to move that rim over where the rim is bent. Okay, rims are made out of alloy, most of them, and some are carbon, but the alloy ones, when you bend aluminum, it doesn't like to bend back. It's cold bending is not a thing for aluminum. So once it's bent, it's kind of almost toast, depending how bad the bend is. Some of the bend you can adjust by the spoke tensions, but if it's a real big bend and you're really forcing it, you're gonna have some really loose spokes and some really tight spokes. And what's gonna happen is that wheel's gonna go back out of true fairly quick, because a high tension spoke is gonna fail. At some point, it's just too much. So you want them consistent throughout. And that's called, it's called spoke tension, and they use a tool called tensionometer to check those, which I do have one here, which is this little guy. And what this does is checks the tension of the spokes. I've been doing this for so long, I kind of just by hand feel know what the range is. But there's a range on here that you want to stick around, and it all depends what bike it is. And again, on rear wheels, the drive side will have a little bit of higher tension than the non-drive, and that's just holding that rim over, that kind of thing. So this one's pretty true, just a little bit of adjustments to it. And I haven't seen anything that really sticks out that it's been compromised, and it seems like it's going to have a lot of life on it. But the tire itself, I might want to look for a different set of tires to put on this. It's still some life on it. There's nothing major that sticks out that says replace me ASAP, but it's getting close. One of those things. And inspecting that, inspecting the hub, inspect those spokes, the hub and the rim. Also, a thing to note too, I have on one of my blogs is rim depth. What that is the rim is typically, when it's made for rim brakes, it's like flat out of the manufacturer with some machining on it. So when the rim is used a lot by the brake pads, it'll start basically wearing down the surface area of the rim. So you want the rim itself to be flat as possible. You'll see some concaveness to it, but for the most part, you want it to be pretty flat. If that concaveness gets really deep, like there's a really big gap in there, like more than a dime, what happens is inside that rim, or on the rim wheel, it's going to start breaking through. This is not worn out, but you can see there's only so much material inside there. So when it starts cutting into that, eventually you will crack. You'll have a crack that'll break that seam, and that's under a lot of wear. You'll see more of that on mountain bikes per se, because there's more contaminants and mud and stuff for it to just kind of sandpapering that side. But I've seen it on road bikes too. People going really fast, a lot downhill and hitting the brakes and so forth. Yeah, it's just, one of those things. And another thing to note, on some of these rims, you'll see like this, it looks like this, carved out line. They had like a wear indicator kind of thing back in the day, where if that became flush, that means the rims need to be used. But I think they stopped doing that because you're actually weakening the rim by doing that, which is kind of counterintuitive. But anywho, ever-changing world of cycling. They try some things for a while and it gets all weird and funky. And for the front, I haven't cleaned it yet, but it's simply similar. And 9 times out of 10, if you're going to have damage on the wheel set, it's going to be the rear wheel. Reason being, that's where all your weight is, and that's where you're going to hit things. Because most of the time when you're riding, you'll miss it with your front wheel, and sure enough, bam, you hit it with your rear. And that's where all your weight is. So if you had a low pressure or whatever, or just, hit something just right, like a crack in the concrete or a seam or somewhere, and it just kind of tweaked it, that can damage it. Usually the fronts are not too damaged because first, you don't have all your weight on it. Second, you usually miss the obstacle with the front wheel. In addition to when you brake heavily on the rear. So the fronts usually, you'll see in a lot better shape and they hold up. Plus, you don't have this offsetting with the rear hub to accommodate for the gears in the back. So if you look at the difference, this one's more of a V-shaped pyramid. This is kind of like the triangle is kind of forced over to the side. That is not, doesn't give it as much strength. So the fronts usually hold up a lot better. And that's why you'll see a lot of front wheels on my website for sale, because the rear wheel was toast and I replaced it with a new wheel set and I got a front wheel. I'm like, there you go. Just hope it finds a good home somewhere. Anyway, so hopefully that covers, what I do to wheels and inspect when I take them off, to adjust them, to clean them. And, this one's pretty much ready. I might replace that tire, but other than that, throw the cassette back on there and we're ready to roll. No pun intended. Oh yeah, a little bit. If you like these videos, subscribe to my channel. If you like them, if you're a Facebooker, go to my Facebook page. Also go to my website too and throw your email down if you want to go there. Thank you for hanging out with me in the garage. Until next time.